It is Monday morning, and American warplanes are back over Iranian airspace for the third time in 4 days. Not a symbolic strike, not a warning shot. Dozens of targets hit overnight, and by sunrise, Iran had already fired back at 5 different countries at once. If you are trying to figure out whether this is the beginning of a real war again, or just another flare-up that fades by Friday, stay with me for the next few minutes, because the answer is buried in details most people scrolling past the headlines are going to miss completely. Here's where things actually stand right now. Late Sunday night, United States Central Command launched a fresh wave of strikes against Iranian military targets. The stated targets were air defense systems, coastal radar sites, missile and drone capabilities, and small attack boats used by the Revolutionary Guard. This was not the first night of this. It was the third round of American strikes against Iran in less than a week, following an even larger wave just 2 days earlier that had already hit close to 140 separate targets across the country. Iranian state media reported explosions overnight in the south, including at a water facility in the city of Machar, where officials said a security guard was killed and several others injured. That is one confirmed death from this specific round. Not dozens. Not hundreds. 1. Keep that number in your head, because how each side is choosing to talk about this conflict, and how loud the noise is compared to the actual damage on the ground, is going to matter a lot by the end of this video. So why did the United States go back on the offensive after weeks of relative calm? The short version is the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow stretch of water separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula carries roughly a fifth of the entire world's oil supply. And for the last several days, Iran's Revolutionary Guard has been trying to reassert control over who gets to move through it. Iranian naval forces fired on commercial vessels transiting the strait, including a tanker carrying liquefied natural gas, claiming those ships had ignored Iranian routing instructions. Washington's answer was immediate. President Trump had already told reporters that the ceasefire agreement between the two countries was, in his words, over. Days later, he went on national television and said Iran had agreed to a deal, then launched a drone at a commercial ship within an hour of leaving the negotiating room. Whether you believe that framing or not, what is not in dispute is what happened next. Iran's declaration that the strait was closed again, followed almost immediately by another American strike package. Now here's the part that most coverage of this story is rushing past, and it is the part that actually tells you where this is heading. Iran did not just absorb these strikes quietly. Within hours of the American attack, the Revolutionary Guard launched retaliatory strikes at 5 different locations across the Gulf simultaneously. Missile and drone attacks were reported targeting American military installations in Bahrain. Sirens sounded across the capital as residents were told to head to shelter. Iran also claimed it had destroyed radar systems inside Oman, a country that has spent the last several days quietly trying to broker exactly the kind of compromise that could pull both sides back from the edge. Kuwait's military said it was actively engaging what it called hostile aerial targets, and Jordan's air defense intercepted 4 separate missiles inside its own airspace. Missiles Jordan says came from Iran, a country Jordan is not even directly at war with. Think about what that means for a second. Iran did not just strike the United States. It struck a neutral, uninvolved third country that simply happens to sit near the flight path. That is not the behavior of a government trying to contain a conflict. That is the behavior of a government trying to make the entire region feel the cost of staying involved. And that strategy is already showing up somewhere. You can actually measure it without relying on anyone's talking points. The price of oil? Brent crude jumped nearly 4% in a single trading session after this latest round of strikes, climbing back above $78 a barrel. It is still well below the wartime peak of over $110 a barrel that the market hit back in May. But the direction matters more than the number. Every time this cycle repeats, energy markets flinch, and that flinch gets felt at gas pumps and grocery store checkout lines thousands of miles from the Persian Gulf. Shipping data tells the same story from a different angle. The number of vessels actually willing to transit the strait has dropped to its lowest level in 5 weeks. On Sunday, only 6 ships made the crossing. Before this war began, that number used to run above 100 ships a day. That gap is not an abstraction. That is global trade quietly grinding to a halt in one of the most important shipping corridors on the planet, and almost nobody outside of commodities traders is watching it happen in real time. Here is where it gets more complicated, and where you need to pay close attention, because this is the piece that actually determines whether this ends in a matter of days or drags on for months. The United States and Iran are not starting from zero in these negotiations. Back in June, both governments signed a memorandum of understanding, an actual framework meant to formally end the war that began earlier this year. Iran's president traveled to sign it. President Trump signed it as well, at a formal ceremony in France. On paper, that deal is still technically in effect. Both sides are roughly at the halfway point of a 60-day window. They gave themselves to hammer out the final details. But here's the problem. Nobody wants to say out loud. The two governments do not even agree on what the deal actually says. Iran is interpreting a clause in that memorandum as giving it the authority to manage and control traffic through the strait. The United States is reading the exact same document and saying no such authority exists and that the waterway belongs to international shipping, not to Tehran. When two nuclear-capable, heavily armed governments cannot agree on the basic meaning of the peace agreement they both signed less than a month ago, that disagreement is not a technicality. That is the entire war, hiding inside a paragraph of legal text. Diplomats know exactly how dangerous that gap has become. Iran's foreign minister flew directly to Muscat to meet face-to-face with his Omani counterpart, because Oman has positioned itself as the go-between, trying to keep this from spiraling completely. Oman has reportedly drafted a proposal that would split the strait into two separately managed shipping routes, an attempt to give both sides a version of control they can each claim as a win without one side fully backing down. Whether that proposal survives contact with two governments that are currently bombing and missiling each other in real time is genuinely an open question. Even the United Nations has stepped directly into this, with the Secretary General issuing a public warning about what he called the catastrophic consequences of continued escalation in this region, language the UN does not use lightly. So where does that actually leave things this morning? On one side, you have an American military that has now conducted 3 separate strike operations against Iran in less than a week, hitting air defense networks, radar installations, and naval assets each time, while consistently stating these operations are limited to protecting commercial shipping, not a full return to open war. On the other side, you have an Iranian government that keeps declaring the strait closed, then gets hit, then retaliates against not just American forces, but against neutral countries caught in the crossfire. All while its own diplomats are sitting in Muscat trying to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the exact same conflict, its military keeps escalating. Those two things, the diplomacy and the military retaliation, are happening at the same time, from the same government. And that contradiction is the single most important thing to understand about where this goes next. A government that is genuinely unified around ending this war does not usually strike 5 countries in one night, while its foreign minister is mid-negotiation 200 miles away. The honest answer, the one that will not fit neatly into a headline, is that nobody watching this from the outside actually knows yet whether Sunday night's strikes were the last gasp of a conflict working its way toward a real ceasefire, or the opening chapter of a much longer and much more dangerous phase. What we do know is what has already happened. American strikes hit dozens of Iranian military targets for the 3rd time this week. Iran responded by hitting 5 countries in a matter of hours. Oil markets reacted immediately. Shipping through one of the most critical waterways on Earth has nearly ground to a halt. And 2 governments that signed a peace agreement less than a month ago cannot even agree on what that agreement actually means. Whatever happens over the next few days in Muscat, in Washington, and in Tehran is going to answer the question everyone in this region is currently holding their breath over, whether this 60-day window ends in a deal or whether it ends the same way the last one did.